I don't know the story of this tombstone, but what strikes me underneath, it says in German, in Russlands Erde liegen ihren Söhne. In Russian soil, their sons lie. They went into Russia to kill, and they ended up being bones in somebody's backyard or in a hole somewhere. So the parents don't even know where their bodies are. So it's just too stupid and too tragic. And that moved me enormously because I could see and feel the suffering of those parents, Edward and Elizabeth Buchelmann. And I asked myself, was this really necessary? Why? Why? And this, of course, is repeated 1,000 times in cemeteries all around the world. It's the story of what happens when people turn to war instead of law. There's nothing worse. Even if they lose a case in law, it will never be as bad as the pain and suffering, not only with the boys who were killed under terrible circumstances, but their parents who lost their sons. Jemand hat mich gefragt einmal, warum sind die alle Kameras da? Und ich habe gesagt, ja, haben Sie nicht gehört? Ich bin ein berühmter amerikanischer Komiker. Und dann hat er gesagt, ja, das habe ich mir gedacht.
So also very fit. Walk around New York with him sometime. He can walk you into the ground. I'm a pretty fit guy. But keeping up with Ben once he gets in full stride it isn't so easy. He works out at the gym pretty much every day. I think he has to be in such good shape.
Okay, all right, all right. The president runs down this way. Running around the White House.
Ben is lovely. He's so persistent. He has a great humor, but below the great humor is a very tough man, so brilliant, doing what he wants to do. I invite him to be the prosecutor in the closing argument of my first case in the SEC. And it was a mess because we discussed, he had to make a 5-minute presentation, and it was a mess discussing with him. No, it's not to say. So it was a big discussion, but he's so brilliant.
I do about 20 knee bends. I lift 25-pound weights with one hand, 25 times.
His enthusiasm, and also the enthusiasm that he can awake in other persons, in the students, his personal feeling that it's important to move the young generation, as he would call it. He brings these ideals and the engagement and the need for people to get engaged.
Oh, well, that's a problem, whether a group can be held liable.
A man of conviction, a principled man. He's not only doing it, but he's passionate about it.
Ben was always a figure that stood out in many different ways. He was the most fearless, the most outspoken, the most determined advocate everybody who had anything to do with the ICC knew Ben.
The country has never been so afraid. What kind of a world do you want? Do you want a world like this, poised, on the verge of exploding at any moment? If you don't like this world, then do something about it. And I think you can.
At the Hall of Justice in Nuremberg, history's greatest trial nears its fateful close. Under the most elaborate security precautions, only official cars pass the heavily guarded street barricade. Flags of the victorious Allies, sitting in judgment on the International Military Tribunal, fly over the court building.
Trying to make Nuremberg a name which is honored for its human rights It is historically true and undeniable that after Nuremberg, the whole issue became dormant. And they seem to have forgotten about Nuremberg. It didn't play a role. I was hammering away at the Nuremberg principles. They appointed UN committees to talk about it. No one was serious about it. They told me time and time again, Ben, get off it. You're never going to have an international criminal court. The big powers are never going to accept it. To which my response was, but I'm going to try. I'm an old war criminal. Am I allowed in here? Hello. You're going to let me come in? Okay, very good. Thank you, I appreciate that. For the opening of any trial, the roles were filled. And my wife and the other wives or secretaries would sit along the benches here in the first row. And the audience then was in the balcony. But after the trials went on a while, they were empty. The Germans were not interested. They were interested in staying alive. No one ever said it was Hitler's fault or that we had this coming or we should have not done it. Not at all. The feeling was we also suffered. And the communists are coming. And the Jews, of course, they're just blamed us for they caused us to lose the First World War, and there's the drain on our country and the inferior people, and we should ausgerottet. They have to be destroyed totally, pulled out root and banner. And that, in fact, was the function of the Einsatzgruppen. They were to exterminate, root and branch, every single man, woman, and child, because they were Jewish or partly Jewish. Jackson's trial was already coming to an end, and Chelford Taylor had been designated to be the chief of counsel for the 12 subsequent trials which were being planned, because they had decided that just trying the 22 top Nazis didn't give a full picture of how it was possible that a civilized country like Germany could allow to happen what happened. They must have had help from all the other agencies, from the industrialists who built Auschwitz, for example. IG Farben was built the Auschwitz concentration camp, who provided the money. The diplomats who were covering up for them, the judges who were prosecuting and punishing people for political reasons, the SS themselves, the mass murderers, how they were organized, the medical guys who performed medical experiments on prisoners, on concentration camp inmates. All of these people were working to make it possible for Germany to do what they did, and we didn't know much about it. The first assignment I had from Taylor was to go to Berlin, collect evidence, and we were going through all the Nazi archives. It was a gold mine. One of my researchers, a Swiss man, came to me and he said, look what I have. And he had these 3 big Leitz Ordners, these loose-leaf books, and Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, which in German meant reports from the Eastern Front, the Union of Soviet Republics. Looked harmless enough, but marked top secret. Geheime Reichssache. They were reports from special units, disguised by not giving them any name which would indicate anything. Einsatz means action groups. Call them action groups, Einsatzgruppen, and nobody knew what they were about. So the discovery of the comprehensive reports gave me a total picture of it. It wasn't just an incident, that something happened by one wild commander. And I could see immediately that this was a story, this was a case. And I took some samples and I flew down from Berlin to Nuremberg, and I said to General Taylor, sir, I said, we've got to get a new trial. He was very hesitant about doing that, so I kept on insisting we can't let these guys go. This is cold-blooded mass murder, and I can prove it on their own statements. He said, can you take this case and handle it on your own? I said, yes. And he said, in addition to your other function? And I said, yes. And so, at 27, I became the chief prosecutor in the biggest murder trial in human history, and set a record for speed and convictions never to be matched, I hope, in human history.
We are now ready to hear the presentation by the prosecution. This was a tragic fulfillment of a program of intolerance and arrogance. Vengeance is not our goal.
Nor do we seek merely a just retribution. We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law. It seemed to me that this is such a serious matter of life and death, not only the death which the defendants faced, but the story of the killing of so many innocent people, that to begin to rant and rave about it gives it a theatrical quality which is unreal. There was a French headline, my Einsatzgruppen's house, saying, "Je vous le demande de leur tête." I ask for their heads. I never said that, nor did I ever raise my voice, nor do I think of any other lawyer, Jonathan Schell, or and the Hollywood version, pounding the table, you know, get these guys and all that. None of that. It was straight matter of fact, low key. These are the facts, these are the crimes, these are the victims. What have you got to say?
The killing of defenseless civilians during a war may be a war crime, but the same killings are part of another crime, a graver one, if you will, genocide, or a crime against humanity.
And the chief prosecutor sat on the first desk here, and so the podium came rather up to here, and I was surely the shortest man in the room, and so I had to look over at the judges. Fortunately, they were elevated, and there was a very nice photograph for you of two defense counsel standing there. Each one is pointing down at the document, and one of the places where they printed it, they said, two defense counsel protesting against Mr. Ferenz's document, who was sitting at his desk, which rather amused me, because it looked as though I was sitting when I was in fact standing. Well, they may have laughed. I don't think they died laughing. I was a tiny infant. The earliest pictures of me confirm that, with a big head and little legs and arms sticking out. And they thought I was not going to live, and there's no sense paying for a circumcision, which might have cost the price of a chicken. And they waited 30 days before I was circumcised. I took it as a sign of Jewish optimism. They cut off a piece before they know how big it's going to be. My family came from what originally was Hungary. That was before World War I. When my sister was born, she was a Hungarian. When I was born in the same house a year and a half later, in 1920, I was a Romanian. My mother, who was really the moving party in the combination, her family had decided to flee the country because of persecution. Jews were persecuted in Romania long before they were persecuted in Germany. And also from poverty. There was no way of living except on the merest fringes. And they were able to pay for passage on the deck of a liner going to the United States via the port of Antwerp. The only reason they went third class was because there was no fourth class. And my father, who had been trained as a shoemaker, he was very proud that he could make a living anywhere because he could make a pair of boots out of a cow's hide. No one told him there were no cows running around New York and that American cowboys didn't exist there. But nevertheless, he took with him all of his heavy shoemaker's equipment, the laths and the hammer, bundled up his family, and off we went on a very stormy voyage. was looking for a place to stay. Very minimum education in Hebrew, didn't know any English. He was there with two tiny children, I being about 9 months old. So he took a job, was glad to get it, I'm sure, as a janitor for a Jewish owner who owned 3 buildings together in what was then a very poor neighborhood of Manhattan Island. It's the neighborhood known as Hell's Kitchen. That was the most dense crime area on a map of crime in the world. The area around Hell's Kitchen was black. They had, for every 100,000 murders or whatever it was, they had a black spot, and that was black. I never saw murder on the street, but I saw on the street all the time. A lot of fighting, beating, you know, gangs come with the others with sticks and punching. No, they didn't carry guns in those days. They carried knives, sticks, clubs. Gangs were routine. Everybody was a member of a gang. In this area at that time, mostly it was warfare between the Italians and the Irish. And I would be adopted as a mascot by one or the other. And some kept the dog as a mascot, some kept me as a mascot. And I never belonged to a gang. So, and that's where my memory begins. We lived in a cellar where my father borrowed or stole or found some partitions, some paneling wood, and built rooms. And there were only about 2 feet of light that would come in from the window, which was higher than the street. My first recollection of a bedroom was with no windows. So it was a rough life, very rough life. The landlord paid very little. My father would do repairs in the house and would get some tips from the tenants. And my mother would earn some money by letting immigrants come and have dinner with us. The background was poverty, but we didn't know the background was poverty because we didn't know any other kind of life. And everybody we knew was living in what we today call poverty. In those days, it was normal. Today, these things look a little bit strange, but they are engraved in my memory and, of course, have affected my capacity to accept any kind of condition. My mother tongue was Yiddish. And when my father wanted to take me to school at the age of 6, I couldn't speak English. And they refused to accept me. They said, no, he doesn't speak the language. I only spoke Yiddish. And they said, it's too small. Come back next year. Near where we lived, there was a movie house known as the Cholona. And for 10 cents, children could be admitted. And so it was a very convenient place to park me. They didn't have any babysitters, and they didn't need any babysitters. The difficulty was there were only silent movies. So I would see the cowboys chasing the Indians, and they'd be, and the piano would be playing away fast music. Oh, it was very exciting, very exciting. And then they would say something, and I would say, "Vuzuktis, vuzuktis," which is Yiddish for, what does it say? What does it mean? You know, and eventually, from the street, from the movies and so on, I began to acquire a smattering of English. When I was 13, I was in the 8th grade in a nice public school in the Bronx. My teacher there was a real teacher, an Irish teacher who loved children, who loved to teach. She said to me one day, "Bring your mother in or your father in." Oh, I thought, boy, I did something wrong again. And they said, "We've been talking about your son. And we think that he's an exceptional boy. And we would like him to go to college. And he can go to college. We will send him to a special school, Townsend Harris High School, the only one of its kind in the country, for gifted boys." I didn't know anybody who went to college. Well, I never considered myself a gifted boy. I never got any gifts. And what moves me is that you take this little boy from nowhere, and suddenly people you don't know send him in a new direction, you know, of his life for some reason. So that still moves me. It still moves me. My good fortune. You know, I could have been just like any other kid. And I'm aware of how fortunate I was coming from that background. My mother, she said, whatever is good for him, that's what we'll do. She doted on me. And I was always grateful to her for that. I still am. You know, this was her darling boy who survived. She lost a couple of children. It was very, you know, a determination on her part to save this child. So they moved to accommodate me from the Bronx to Manhattan, between Park and Madison, a very chic neighborhood. Now, of course, we couldn't afford that neighborhood, so in line with our tradition, my mother became the janitor. There was no gangs anymore, no neighborhood friends. There were no children. In that area, it seemed no children. The children were all sent off to boarding school somewhere. So there was a big gap in my adolescence. I never had an adolescence, a normal adolescence. I went from childhood to college. My Townsend Harris High School book. It says here I was on the class paper, in the French club, the Pan American Club, and the life-saving squad. The talents, he flows through the air with the greatest of ease. That's because I was good on the trapeze. I wasn't good for a football team or a basketball team, but on the trapeze, I could be the best. I had made up my mind that whatever I want to do in life, I better do it better than anybody else. Because I had handicaps of my size, I was small, I had bad background, and somebody must have told me, well, if you want to go to the best, Harvard Law School is the best. I filed an application for Harvard Law School. And what made Harvard decide to accept me, I have no idea. My son is doing the same thing as I'm doing, as you may have noticed. He used to be an international tax lawyer, and I thought that was really a waste of time and talent, and persuaded him to join me when he had already decided that he wanted to leave the international taxation field. It was very complicated, very difficult. But I let my children do whatever they decided they wanted to do. And I gave them my best advice, which they usually ignored, and they went their merry way, more or less. But Papa was always there in the background. That helped.
She was glad to get out of the house, I tell you.
I always felt that my father was very loving. He was very friendly. We used to cuddle and play, and he would give us rides on his back, and we'd play hide and seek, and he was very, very affectionate with the children. But he was also demanding in the sense that he had expectations that, for example, with respect to my mother, that we would always be very, very respectful of my mother.
Look, I'll show you your mother. She looked like a very simple girl there.
Yeah, my gosh. You know, look at this, 1936, she was 16 years old.
Yes. Gertrude came to America, and we became friends shortly because she was the niece of my stepmother. So I saw her quite often, and eventually we just going pretty steady, and we've been doing that now for about 80 years. So we never had a quarrel. We had differences of opinion about how she was spoiling my children, things like that, but we never shouted or pounded the table. So it's been a very happy marriage, and I've been very fortunate. 28 June 1946, so we were married on March 31st. So it was almost 6 months, March, April, May, June. 3 months later, that we started our honeymoon. And it was going to be only a brief honeymoon. Came home 10 years later with 4 children.
I think wanted to instill in all of us the sense that we were very, very fortunate to have what we had in life. He had started with nothing. He used to say, the one thing I cannot teach my children is adversity.
What do we got here? Report of birth. I have a birth certificate. Look at that. Oh, that's Donald, my son Donald. Carol came first. Carol Ann, then came I just loved children. And so I thought we would have a very nice big family and one would take care of the other. I wasn't worried about supporting anybody. I always managed somehow, and I thought we would manage somehow then. And we started in Nuremberg with 4 children born within 5 years. I had been through Nuremberg during the war. A total wreck would be a reasonably accurate overall description. They couldn't find the roads. Food was rationed. Currency was worthless. Trade was gone by cigarettes. For the Germans, it was hell. Better than it had been a couple of weeks before. For the Americans, it was a playground. Parties every night, whiskey 50 cents a bottle, Fräuleins everywhere. It was an atmosphere of jubilation amid destruction because we'd won the war. From the German point of view, they had been defeated. We had no contact with the Germans. We were not allowed to fraternize. And that didn't mean they didn't fraternize. They called it re-education. Re-education was allowed, fraternization wasn't. I said, well, you have to go and re-educate them. Anyway, so that's the way it went. Totally unreal, bizarre.
These people, whose mass dementia launched 5 wars in the past 80 years, are tasting today the defeat and humiliation they inflicted on their neighbors. Many Germans, like this Jeep driver, are still doing Goebbels' propaganda work. German girls sing the same song to fraternizing GIs. Poor Germany, the Fräulein say, it wasn't our fault. The same sad story is peddled to American housewives by their servants. Germany today, festering in the ruins she brought on herself, is not a penitent, regenerate nation. The Germans, nursing old and new hatreds, are listening hourly for the voice of any leader that desperation may produce. Tough, uprooted Hitler youth hold the seeds of tomorrow's danger. Potential storm troops of 1960 are still there, breeding and brooding in the devastation of defeat. So America must remain on guard until these people have forgotten how to hate.
There's my friend Rush, quite a mean guy, and a picture of him when he was lying flat on his back. His lawyer came into my office, which was on the 2nd floor here, a few days before the trial was to begin, and he said that we'd have to drop the charges against Otto Rush. And I said, why? He said, because he's suffering from Parkinson's disease. I was then 27 years old. I said, what's Parkinson's disease? He said, well, he's trembling all the time. I said, if I killed so many people, I'd be trembling too. Did his lawyer really think he was going to get me to drop the case? I have spared my audience here the language. I said, if he's breathing, I'm going to indict the son of a bitch.
Der Angeklagte hat mir eben erklärt, dass bei seinem Zustand gar nicht in der Lage sei, die Worte des Anklagevertreters aufzunehmen. Höre kaum.
I really hated to lose him. I would like to have arranged to have him hanged. But as I say, he was judged by a higher authority. Ollendorf, of course, here is the lead defendant. He's the one whose record said he killed 90,000 Jews, but he said it must have been something less, maybe 80,000, maybe 75,000. You can't tell for sure, you know how it is. They sometimes exaggerated the body count, which I found very telling. If a man wants to say that he killed more than he actually killed, can he then say that he was against it? He's bragging of how many he killed, and he tried to make it bigger than he actually killed. This is not a man who's acting under duress. This is a man who's a believer. And so it was. These were believers. They were firmly convinced Nazis, otherwise they wouldn't have come into that position. And they believed that to the end, to the end. Not a single one from that door said, Your Honors, I want to say I'm sorry. Not a single one, and I was waiting. I'm still waiting. The assumption that these must be wild beasts, absolutely false. You wouldn't know them from anybody else you might meet in the Festspielhaus in Salzburg or at any gala event, well-educated, certainly kind to their pets, probably good parents, and thought it was a patriotic duty and a heroic thing to murder thousands of Jewish children. Why 22? Because there are only 22 seats in the Nuremberg courtroom. So 3,000 men, I tried 22. What happened to the other 3,000? Nothing happened to the other 3,000. So justice is not done. You have only a symbol of justice, a smattering, in the hope that this will deter others from committing such crimes in the future. That's what you're trying to do, and to educate the world, public, to what really happened. For that, you don't need to try 3,000 people. I picked them. The two leading characteristics was their rank, and the second one was their education. I had 6 or 9 SS generals in the dock, and most of them had PhDs. I said, no enlisted men in my dock. Maybe that was my prejudice from being an enlisted man in the Army, and I realized that they usually get blamed for everything, where the higher-ups usually walk free. It's not here. Here we begin at the top.
I see there's another objection coming. I'll continue the quote.
That was my job, to find the evidence which would stand up in trial. Brigada for so-and-so. He told me that you were in charge of Commando Number 10, which according to your report and his report, it killed 50,000 people. So what do you have to say about that? Me, I wasn't even there. I mean, maybe it happened, but you know, I just signed documents. I was at my grandmother's funeral. What's your grandmother's name? When did she die? Call it investigating unit. We got a report, he says his grandmother died in so-and-so. Check it out. Next day we get a report, he never had a grandmother. She was dead long before he was born. And they all said, what? Jews were killed? Huh? One of my defendants said that. That's the only time I really wanted to jump over the barrier and really poke his eyes out. He said, Juden erschossen, das höre ich hier zum ersten Mal. Jews were shot, I hear it here for the first time. And I've got reports showing that he killed thousands of people. And he says, I hear it here for the first time. What are you going to do? Jump over there and put a hole in his ear till it comes out the other side? That was my temptation. But I, of course, didn't. I said, well, we'll refresh your recollection, you know?
This is what Europe's like, now that the war is over and the Germans are beaten. These are a few of the millions of people who were once labor slaves of the Nazis, and who are now trying desperately to get home. Home to a little farm in Poland, home to a tiny coastal village in Normandy, home to Leningrad, 3,000 miles away. To the Allied military government, they're known as displaced persons. And not until they reach their various countries will there again be order in Europe.
I recognize that there's more to a war than just ending the fighting among the soldiers. I'd seen the victims. They had absolutely nothing, nothing at all. They had a tattoo on their arm. No family, no friends, no money. Everybody they knew had been killed, mostly. To forget about them and say the war's over, go home. There was no home to go back to. In August 1948, I was approached by a representative of a number of leading Jewish organizations who informed me that military government had just passed a law for the restitution of unclaimed and heirless property taken away from Nazi victims. The first question really was, should we negotiate with the Germans at all? There were many people who felt, what? You're going to sit down and talk to the murderers about how much they're going to pay for my parents? My children? Have you no shame? Have you no morals? You will disgrace us and dishonor us forever if you dare to accept or ask for or suggest that they should pay for such a thing. And there were others, which I was included, said no. We will ask for what we think is just and right, but the wrongdoer should try to compensate the person who's been injured. What about the injuries to people? People who were permanently damaged in their health. Not only their mental health, which of course they were all more or less subjected to, but a shoemaker who lost his arm, a violin player whose hand was gone, and things like that. How much do you get for false imprisonment? Somebody held in a concentration camp, how much compensation do you get? Well, I said, we don't have much money, we'll give him 5 marks. That was the equivalent of $1. For every day you can prove that you were in Auschwitz, $1. And of course, it's true. The neighbors tell me he wakes up screaming every night. It's true that he saw his wife and his children burning. But maybe his grandfather had mental troubles. You have to prove to us that it's not inherited, you know? There are many people who have mental problems, you know? The German finance minister said, look, we're not responsible for that. That was the Nazi government. We're a successor government. We're not responsible for what happened before. And I said, yes, you are. You took over the property, you take over the liabilities. And then we had to draft the law. Bundesentschädigungsgesetz number 1. Bundesentschädigungsgesetz is federal compensation law. Okay, there was then a treaty drawn up, which also provided a bulk sum to the state of Israel of 1 billion marks. And how do you justify demanding for a country which was not in existence, from a country which was also not in existence, and which was completely destroyed, and which had nothing? How do you demand compensation from them, and how do you get it? All of these problems were never foreseen in advance. So what began as a simple moral obligation, so clear and so easy, turned out to be impossible of administration. And I managed to get out by making these global settlements. This kind of experience, having had that in life, I don't get stumped by a problem just because it's impossible. We'll find another way. If you ask me what I think I did in life which was important, that would be before the Einsatzgruppen case, because there were no precedents whatsoever. On the contrary, all the legal precedents said if there's any reparations after a war, it's done between the governments only, not on a government individual basis. We broke that precedent, did it on an individual basis. Even so, whole categories were never compensated anything. They were in the wrong country at the wrong time. Well, for example, somebody who had to flee before he was captured by the Germans and lived a miserable life, hiding in Siberia and everything else, got nothing, nothing. And the women, Polish women who were subject to medical experiments, who were cut open and put sand and glass in their wounds, they were told you get nothing because you're a resident of Poland and we have no diplomatic relations with Poland, so you get nothing. I said, like hell, you get away with that. And I was part of a high-pressure operation to finally get compensation for these Polish women who were not covered. They were Catholic women mostly, who were not covered by the original law. Because of that ridiculous reason, there's no diplomatic relation, as though that were a free pass. So they invited me to come to Poland, and I flew to Warsaw. The plane was late in landing. And when I got there, the women, the plane was late because it was bad weather, it was storm. The women had been waiting partly in the rain, and they had all been carrying flowers, and the flowers were all wilted, and they were standing at the barrier when I came off the plane. And that's another touching experience of my life, to see the gratitude of these poor women, you know, who came with a few wilted flowers to say thank you. So, and these are the sort of things which keep me going, you know.
Oh, here's a picture I haven't seen before. I believe that's you.
That is me. You don't have to believe it, it is me. Mm-hmm. That's the Nuremberg courtroom, Mr. Bell.
Yeah.
And Mom is on this
Mom's
picture,
right
too.
here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and Mom's behind you here someplace.
I'm sitting right there. We had a big chart like that showing the layout, the organizational plan of the Einsatzgruppen on the wall, showing the terrain in which they covered at which period of time. I had a big map on my office, on my wall. I knew every town and village. I had never been in the Soviet Union, but I knew every town and village and how many people they killed there and who killed them and when, and I knew why. You had 3,000 men who every day were doing the same thing, mass murder every day for about 2 years, including thousands of children, shot one shot at a time, or their heads bashed in against a tree to save ammunition, or the mother told you can keep the baby next to your chest, and the soldiers are told don't aim for the mother, aim for the baby, because if you do, you'll kill both of them. With one shot, you'll save ammunition, and the mother will be quiet. And that was the Ollendorf humanitarian approach to it. So, I don't know, I don't want to look at the pictures. Most of the men, sometimes for many years, I'd look into the railroad car to see if they were sitting on the same train waiting for me. This is a typical Einsatzgruppen report from Einsatzkommando 3, and it's a report of the completed executions on my order of meine Anordnung und meine Befehl, on my order and my direction. The following executions were carried out. In Kaun, Section 7, 416 Jews, 47 Judinnen, female Jews, 1 Lithuanian, 2 Lithuanian commandos, 1 Russian communist. So being a communist was grounds for killing it. They had 3,834 killings on the 1st of December, 1941. As it goes over, there must be the name of the commander somewhere. But here, she says, look what I'm doing. I just killed 3,800 people. Do you think I'm due for a promotion? And they were bragging. That's why Ollendorf said correctly, they probably were exaggerating the body count. We do the same thing. All armies do that when they're fighting the enemy. They want to show they killed more to get an extra ribbon. They have it in Vietnam all the time, American soldiers, so on. So it's the war itself which corrupts the people, whatever the nationality is. The process of war making turns people into murderers, and they think they're heroes the more they murder.
This is D-Day.
There I was, an undergraduate of the Harvard Law School, and the Army, recognizing these talents, immediately made me a private in the artillery. Of course, I knew nothing about artillery, and I was assigned to an anti-aircraft battalion being trained for the invasion of France. And off I went. One day, they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're being transferred to General Patton's headquarters." And I reported there to a judge advocate colonel who said, "I've been instructed to set up a war crimes branch. And your name has been forwarded from Washington. What's a war crime?" He had no idea of what a war crime was. There I was, first man appointed to do something about what the President of the United States and Churchill and Stalin had agreed should be done. The Germans should be held accountable for any crimes they commit. This is a sensitive subject with me. I've dug up bodies with my hands, pulled them out of a hole with a Jeep backing up, hoping that the whole leg doesn't come off. To give you some feeling, this is not a game. It's a very grim exercise, which not an exercise, events, which I look back on and I wonder how I did it. But I did it by creating an artificial barrier in my mind so that I didn't see, I didn't feel. And I was just to do the job, get it done. And the same would come to the concentration camps. We get a report from a tank commander saying we've just entered the town of Ohrdruf. There are strange people walking on the roads. They look like they're coming from some kind of a work camp. They're all wearing pajamas, looks like pajamas, and they look like they're starving. And I'd race to the camp and try to get whatever evidence there is in the records there. I have seen the bodies stacked up like cordwood in front of the crematoria, bodies covering the floor of a room like this with 100 bodies on it, which you don't know if they're dead or alive because they're lying without moving, and you step over them and then some hand moves or an eye moves and someone is pathetic calling for help. The scenes are really incredible because you cannot duplicate them. There is an atmosphere. The smell, crematoria are going, it has a special smell to it. All the diseases, diarrhea everywhere, dysentery, typhus, lice, rats all over the place. Dead bodies scattered around, some of them still in the carts being transported toward the crematorium, some of them just dropped. So when I was in the Holocaust Museum to show my son around, a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I said, well, a bunch of pictures. They had a box of photos there. They brought out a box, and they said, here, and I said, take a look at these. These are war photos. And the first ones I looked at was a guy that I had dug up, and I burst into tears. I recognized him immediately, of course, but I never had an experience like that. Tears just shot out of my eyes. It is in me, and I suppose you could call it a form of trauma. I have not put it aside because I believe it's a very important problem. And at a certain point in my life, when I was age 50, I decided to give up whatever else I was doing and to devote myself to just trying to prevent that from happening again. And that, as you may imagine, is quite a difficult thing because it's been happening again and again and again, and it's going on as we talk here today. And well, I will continue doing that as long as I can. I don't think that's a cocoon. I think it's something which is in me, not hidden away as a cocoon might be, but as a driving force. What I've seen has been so horrible that someone's got to do it.
We were aware that these horrible, horrible things had happened. Of course, we didn't really fully grasp the context in which they happened. If you show a 6-year-old child a photograph of someone with their skull crushed in or nude women strewn dead bodies in a field, or corpses piled high like wood on a wagon, emaciated bodies, that certainly creates a very strong and stark impression. I think my father wanted us to have an appreciation of what we had and what others had been deprived of, so that perhaps we could grow up with an awareness which would color our thinking about the world and our place in it. That's the only thing I can really imagine in terms of what would have prompted him to show his children at such a young age these images that were so stark and so frightening, really.
My job was to get the evidence of the crime and get the hell out of there as fast as I could. It was not a place to stay. So I closed off the Schreibstuhl. I went there and found out who was the Schreiber. It was usually an inmate, and give me all the information here, the Totenbücher, the arrival of the transports, where they came from, the reasons for death, auf der Flucht erschossen, auf der Flucht erschossen, auf der Flucht erschossen, auf der Flucht erschossen, typhus, 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 all artificial lies. They were murdered. And then one very interesting thing, I'm not sure anymore which camp it was. It might have been Flossenburg. And this was unusual because the Schreiber, when I came there, and he said, I've been waiting for you, and he said, I have something for you. And I went with him to the electrified fence, and so he dug up a box. He explained that all SS members who came into that camp had formed an SS club. And they met in the evening in the club, but they had a picture of who they were, their name, where they're from, their rank, and what dates they attended the club meetings. And there was there may be room for 10 such entries, at which time the card was full, and they had to issue a new card. He was supposed to destroy the old one and issue the new one. Instead of destroying it, he hid it, he saved it. Every time he did that, he took his life in his hands. Because if they had caught him, they would have killed him right then and there. No doubt in my mind whatsoever. Instead, he saved them and put them in a box, waiting for the day when he would get his revenge or that justice would be done. And that day came when I walked in. And he said, "This is for you." And I looked at it. Fantastic. It was like finding the Einsatzgruppen reports. I had the name of every guard who'd been in the camp, when he came, when he went. And all of them, without exception, were conspirators engaged in mass murder. And don't tell me otherwise, because I saw it. I've witnessed the situation where vengeance takes over. Vengeance takes over, they kill everybody. And also scenes when the inmates caught some of the guards and beat them to death. I witnessed a guard being caught. I was standing there with my M1 rifle. They were beating him up, and they then burned him alive. They took him to the crematorium, which was not far away, about from here to that wall, had him on one of the metal trays, which they used to dump the bodies into the crematoria. They put him in, warm him up, take him out, beat him up again, tie him up again, put him in again. Now, I was watching that. I had no desire to join them, certainly not. And I asked myself, should I try to stop it? I don't think I could have, but I let it run. I let it run. And I went about my other business.
State your full name. How old are you? What is your residence?
There were the beginnings of war crime trials, must have been by that time, but the military commissions, which took place in Dachau. The trials were conducted by 3 officers, none of whom usually had any legal training. The trials lasted a couple of minutes. The defendants were tried in batches, 20, 30, 40 at a time. The guards who were picked up in Buchenwald, Mauthausen, Flossenburg, Ebensee, other camps that I'd been in. The defendants were lined up on benches and a number on their chest. Presiding justice would call number 7, Hans Schmidt, stand up. You're accused of crimes against humanity, war crimes. Didn't talk about crimes against humanity, war crimes, and that prisoners were beaten, starved, I don't know what. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty. What have you got to say for yourself? I wasn't there, I was a cook, I didn't see anything, I got orders, I wasn't bringing my orders, whatever. Next, go down the list. Go through 20 cases, maybe an hour. Then they adjourn themselves, go to the next room, come back 10 minutes later. All the defendants are found guilty and sentenced to death. And when I checked in the Landsberg prison some years later, I said, how many people were actually executed here based on those trials? I said about 1,000. Nothing to be proud of. That's what they were discussing today when killing bin Laden. You have to wait, give him a trial, or you just shoot him. And it's a difficult question. Difficult question. Where is justice? Don't ask me. I don't know. So it's my answer to those questions is you got to stop war making. The history of man is a history of combat. War has been glorified as the means of heroism, conquest, riches, and expanses. And we've had thousands of years of that, and it continues to this day. War is glorified. You get medals. I have 5 battle stars for not having been killed in 5 of the major battles in World War II. The flag is flying, the band is playing, everybody is marching for war, glorification of war. The powerful states are not ready to surrender their power and right, they perceive it as a right, to go to war, to settle their differences which they cannot settle peacefully by other means. So to reverse that and have to glorify peace and despise war, as it should be, for the most horrendous and disgusting way of settling disputes between people, groups, or states, to reverse that, it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of education and a lot of persistence, and one human life is not enough.
There is a quotation from Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, who was interviewed in his cell at Nuremberg. He was quoted as saying that it is so easy for the leaders of any nation to take their country into war, whether it's a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, or a communist state. He said, it's easy. All you have to do is have the leaders tell the people that they're under attack and criticize those who are opposed to them for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. Everybody knows Tony Blair lied to the country. Everybody knows George Bush lied to the country. They have documented evidence. It reads right out of the Hermann Göring playbook. You know, I read that, I'm thinking Donald Rumsfeld, he must have been sitting there, you know, taking notes while Göring was talking. If we as a globe could say, you know what, we're not going to put up with this anymore. Wouldn't that be lovely?
I see the memorials that we were today, the Vietnam War, a war which is, they have achieved nothing. They have killed thousands and thousands of people. For what? For what? To make a memorial here listing the bodies, the names of the people killed? It's crazy. And they say, I'm crazy. I'm not the one that's crazy. The ones who endure such a system are the ones who are crazy. And I'm so convinced of that I can't stop trying to change it, knowing that I will not succeed. But I will have tried, and that's what I want to do. I got to the courthouse early. I was the first one here. I sat down in the corner by myself. I had a scorecard, the name of the defendant, charges, what I thought the sentence would be or should be. It's my personal opinion. And then left room to put in what it actually was. They didn't plead guilty because they didn't feel guilty. If anything, they felt they were being victimized. It often happens that the criminal thinks that he's a victim. But the judges didn't quite feel that way. And so when the trial was over and the sentencing was ready, they would come up a lift which was right there. The defendant would step out, step forward, pick up the earphones, put it on, stand there like this. For the crimes of which you have been convicted, say the judges who were there, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. They go with the earphone. Step back into the lift, boom, boom, down. And the Einsatzgruppen trial 13 times. Death by hanging, down, next, and so on. Very dramatic, very quiet, no cheering, no noise, no applause, no comment. It was macabre, the whole scene. At no time did I have any feeling of, I got him. Nothing at all like that, nothing at all. It was a very grim thing. I was nearly numb. I had a tremendous headache when it was over. It was customary that the chief prosecutor, at the end of a trial, whatever the outcome would be, would have a party at his home to celebrate the ending of the trial. And I had a party arranged in my home. I was supposed to go back when the trial, when it was over, sentencing was over. I was sick. My head was pounding. I just couldn't go to my own party. I went home and I lay down and went to bed. The party went on without me. I'm not against the death penalty under appropriate circumstances, when the rights of the victim must also be weighed against the rights of the perpetrator has to be weighed against the rights of the victim and put them in a scale. And the perpetrator's rights are not higher than the rights of his victims. Never, not in my mind. Now, that may be unpopular with some of the human rights people, but that is my personal conviction. I had done a fantastic historical job of convicting mass murderers and then setting up the restitution programs. But after doing it for 10 years, neither my wife nor I wanted our children to be raised to start school in Germany, so we were both determined to go home. And we went home, but as you've noted, home was not the home we had left. And so I embarked on that kind of a different career, and it wasn't very satisfactory. The normal practice of law, a few cases of estates and marriages and divorces and that sort of thing, which I didn't like. And New York was a very corrupt city. And I finally decided there must be a better way of spending life. And I was encouraged to do something else because my children, like many of the teenagers of that period, were on drugs, were running away from home, were giving us all the aggravation they planned to give parents to get even with them for having been born. And I thought, well, I'll do something else with my life. The world was in a terrible mess. War was on in Vietnam. Children were all going crazy. American protesters were in the street. We were losing the war. We were pretending we were winning the war. We were sending young people out to be killed, knowing that they were going to be killed and there'd be no change. I recognized all of that. Telford Taylor went to Vietnam, came back, and he wrote a book, Nuremberg in Vietnam. The basic theme was that we forgot, the United States forgot the lessons it tried to teach the rest of the world at Nuremberg. And the lessons that the United States was trying to teach at Nuremberg was that aggressive war is a crime. It's the supreme international crime. All states must be bound by the same law, including those who sit here now in judgment. And of course, the Americans didn't pay much attention to that. The Russians didn't, the French didn't, the Chinese didn't either. And I thought, well, if I want to change the world, where do I begin? I don't know anything about running a world, but I knew something about international law and about international courts. I had recognized that we ought to have an international criminal court to deal with international crimes. I thought I will build on the Nuremberg precedents, and I will see where it takes me. So I got accreditation for different non-governmental organizations, which gave me access to the United Nations. I sat in on all the meetings. No one was serious about it. They told me time and time again, Ben, get off it. You're never going to have an international criminal court. The big powers are never going to accept it. To which my response was, but I'm going to try.
Ben Ferencz was really the Nuremberg principles incarnated into a human being. He motivated generations like mine to become active or to confirm our commitment and never give up. That was always his message. I remember when I met him the first time at the margins of the ad hoc committee concerning the International Criminal Court, 1995. And his message was, do not give up, never give up, do never allow anyone to make you think that you will give up.
The committees were working. I was pushing propaganda in papers and books and printing out pamphlets and giving it out, a one-man lobby. Everybody regarded as a bit of a nut, and probably were right.
And they were people who, again, I think were a pain in the neck. They had an idea, and they spent all their time pushing this idea. And it's just so important, I think, that they kept that idea alive. But boy, it took a long time, didn't it?
And along came finally the breaking point. 10,000 women were raped in former Yugoslavia. And the American women, God bless them, were up in arms. What are you going to do about it? This is outrageous. We have to stop these rapes which are going on and killing of the women. And it was largely a woman's movement which brought enough pressure on Washington and the politicians to say we have to do something.
Shortly after that, the Rwanda genocide, happened. And again, we said never again. But I think this was a turning point, really, in that the promise that we made before the 1990s, that this will not happen again, was happening right before our eyes.
Rwanda, I considered a disgrace to our entire community. After the Nazi Holocaust, to allow 800,000 people to be butchered in Rwanda, and the international community lets it happen, knowing that it's likely to happen, I think that's a disgrace to every politician and every diplomat who was in office and who could have spoken up and done something about it, and they didn't. So the lesson of Nuremberg was forgotten. That was the scene as we went into the Rome conference. Under the pressure of events, many of the states realized, the small states particularly, that we should have a court. The big powers, led by the United States, said, no way. Many of the people said, Ben, get off it with this international criminal court stuff. You're going to sink the whole ship. And I said, I don't care. With that kind of a background, with nobody believing it was possible.
Je mets en voie l'adoption du projet de statut pour la Cour criminelle internationale.
I was invited to make a statement at the opening of the conference. I had no official standing, I never have had. And I began by saying, I have come to Rome to speak for those who cannot speak, the victims of atrocious crimes. And I said, I've come here to encourage you in your work. You can do it.
The vote will now be closed if you have pressed the right button.
I was sitting there and I was applauding, and Gertrude was with me, sitting next to me. We had a prime seat there, and we began applauding. I went up to Philippe Kirsch, who was in the chair, and I congratulated him, and I meant it. And it was a time of jubilation, wild jubilation in the audience. They all jumped up and were, hooray, we didn't fail. That's about what it was. So there was a historic event.
I, Fatou Bensouda, solemnly undertake that I will perform my duties and exercise my powers as prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court is responsible for investigating and prosecuting the crimes of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and potentially the crime of aggression. We have seen over the years those who commit these crimes go away with amnesties, and by having this court now, that is over, that is gone. Because what this court is saying is no matter who you are, no matter how high you are in your official capacities, if you commit these crimes, you will be held accountable. Our role is here to listen to you regarding what went through in the post-electoral violence. Nothing really prepares you about the massiveness of the crimes that we deal with at the international level. It sucks you in. It stays with you, and you go with it day to day. But I believe that what is most important is listening to them and transform those stories into evidence, present it to the judges, and the judges are able to do something about it. And in that way, you not only bring about accountability, which they very much need, but you also contribute to helping those voiceless victims to express their voices loud and clear.
And I'll hand to Mr. Ferencz now.
Thank you. May it please your honors, this is a historic moment in the evolution of international criminal law. For the first time, a permanent international criminal court will hear the closing statement for the prosecution as it concludes its first case against its first accused, Mr. Thomas Lubango Dila. Seizing and training young people to hate and kill presumed adversaries undermines the legal and moral firmament of human society. Let the voice and the verdict of this esteemed global court now speak for the awakened conscience of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferencz.
I'm glad I wasn't in Joel Ollendorf's shoes. It's the last March. The wages of inhumane conduct. Here we are. All right. This has all been renovated. Ollendorf was my lead defendant. I came to his cell and I said, "Kann ich für Sie etwas tun, Herr Ollendorf? Can I do something for you, Mr. Ollendorf?" He said, "Look, Hitler told us that the Soviets were planning to attack. And in order to defend ourselves, we had to attack first. This in law is known in German law as putativ Notstand, presumed self-defense. But what grieved me is to know that the United States government makes the same arguments today. Our military defense policy does not eliminate the argument that a presumed self-defense against a presumed attack is justifiable. And it is still part of our military code. And as an American who was the chief prosecutor in a trial which ordered 13 people to be hanged because they made such an argument, to find the same argument being held forth as a possibility by the United States policy, that grieves me. I think it's a serious mistake. I think it's short-sighted. I think we have to move away from that, because if everybody followed the same policy, everybody would be very busy trying to kill everybody else. And that's why I'm working on this still and hope to continue working on it. I'm only 93, so I hope we see some more progress.
They tell you that there is a right way and a wrong way to kill people during war. You can have what we call conveniently collateral damage, as long as the military objective is significant and, quote, legitimate, and as long as the use of force is proportional and so forth. You can kill women and children and babies and sick people legally, under the rules of war. What we don't have today is a body of law that says, hey, wait a minute, you can't claim to legitimately kill anybody in a war if the war itself from inception is illegal. And this is the gap that my father is so ardent about trying to close today.
The idea of this whole meeting is to come up with a clear statement which we made at Nuremberg 60 years ago, saying that aggression is the supreme international crime for which the leaders will be held to account in an international court.
And I gave him a pep talk and I said, look, you're going to have to take one more step forward now in Kampala, accept aggression as a crime, and build on the steps that went before. And they didn't. And they didn't. They postponed it for an indefinite period. I am not one to accept. If the lock is on the courthouse door indefinitely, I will go through the window. And I'm in the process of doing that right now. We send a drone plane from someplace far away, which is aiming for a man that we regard as being very dangerous and very bad, even if there's been no trial of any kind. And we drop the bomb on his house, and we kill 25 people who had nothing to do with it. What is the effect of that? They will hate the country that dropped the bomb on them, and they will want to kill as many of the Americans, let us assume, for purposes of discussion, as they can. That is the predictable consequence of that. You cannot kill an idea with a gun. If you want to kill an idea, you have to have a better idea.
Well, I'm not looking for the money. I used to work as an investigator.
How much did I say?
Too much.
How much? For
Too much.
2 minutes?
Anyway, it was good. I think that was a superb panel. Could you hear?
Yeah, I heard it all very well.
Don't just look at what you hear and see. Ask what has not being said, what you don't hear and see, to tell you what's happening behind the scenes.
Of course.
You know?
But there's another thing, another point I would have liked to make. I just couldn't cover the point. Who decides? If you kill one man, it's murder. If you kill 1,000 children, it's not less than murder. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights lists murder as a violation of human rights. People have a right to live in peace and dignity without fear of being murdered. And if they call it collateral damage or some other name to try to conceal it, it's at best negligent homicide and manslaughter. If we cannot bring illegal warfare, crime of aggression, to the court because the door has been locked, come in through the window. Call it a crime against humanity. Come in through another window if you have to. Do it in your national courts. But do it. It's not enough to make speeches. Do it. The people who sit here have the power to do it. And so I repeat that if you do, I hope, I am sure you'll have a more humane world than the one that I was an Augenzeuge. If there is a world 100 years from now, they will look back at this period as a period of insanity, where the human beings were trying to become human and were still behaving inhuman in an inhuman way. Nuremberg was a marker. Nuremberg was a tremendous step forward. The fact that it has not been destroyed in the last 70 years is itself a tribute to its rationality and to its acceptability. When I began talking about an international criminal court, which goes back 50 years or more, let me see, I wrote my first article on criminal responsibility in 1939. That's a long time ago. But I feel that there's been so much progress made. Now, they thought you'd never have an international criminal court. We have lots of international criminal courts now. They're blossoming. They're growing out. The world has accepted that we've got to have an international criminal court to try all kinds of crimes against humanity. And that is happening now in my lifetime. And one human life is a short period of time in the history of man. For thousands of years, we had nothing. Now we have international courts. They are too expensive, it takes too long, and it's complicated and all that. But they are the beginning. They are the prototype. They're the newborn babe that will lead us, I hope, to a more rational, humane order where we recognize that we must settle our disputes by peaceful means only, through judicial type process, or else we will destroy the whole world.
That's a funny letter about Marlene Dietrich.
That must be a supplement to the other letter. The other one, I remember it. You know?
Yeah, well, you don't remember everything. Look, if I was you, and I walked in on Marlene Dietrich in the bathtub, I'd remember
Deutsch.